The other big idea. Other big idea is situational awareness, being more aware of what's going on around us. The example you see on the board is of an airport. This is an example at an airport facility. Obviously, Transportation Security Administration through Department of Homeland Security has a huge initiative to protect our mode of travel based on 9/11 events, right? So this has kind of come up with that. Being able to actually tie in with all of these physical security systems, these IT systems, and visualize on picture using GPS positioning of your facility and looking and seeing what's going on at each point. So you have a constant dashboard of understanding what's going on within your system, having that situational awareness. Situational awareness is obviously key to understanding when a risk is occurring that may propagate into some tremendous amount of misuse or any type of malicious action of that nature, right? So looking for tools that can kind of provide that even more, we said risk visualization in the last on the last slide, but even more apparent to someone that's sitting at a control board, monitoring your physical security. They're not just getting alerts, but they're seeing it. They're seeing it in real time and what's happening. You want to look at that. Right. Also, leading into incident response. You want to be able to utilize whatever solution you have to recognize a risk, right? As I said, then see it happen. If you're unable to prevent it, something does occur, and then take advantage of all those endpoints you have out in the field to immediately tie in an escalation of privilege and use of an access badge to get into an area off hours and recognize that behavioral trend, and then pull up your video feed so you can watch what that person's doing and see where they're at, right? You want to be able to see that, because that helps you be more secure. It helps you respond faster. You know exactly how many malicious actors you have. You know what they're trying to do. You're getting a record of the event. You're creating audit trails for incident response, right? You want to look for that in the solution. It should tie all of that together. And then the last item that we talked about was being compliant, right? We want to be able to comply. We want to know what our security and compliance posture are. Well, obviously, if you're visualizing risks, you're controlling workflows for access, you're creating incident response and recovery actions in an automated fashion, you're dramatically increasing your security posture. So by increasing your security posture, as I stated earlier, you'll get to that compliance posture. You know, security will breed compliance. It's just a matter of actually documenting it and getting it down. And that's what you need your tool to do. You need a tool that's tying in these physical and IT systems, but then that physical and IT system tie-in has to relate to a very strong GRC type system, governance, risk, and compliance system. It has to create the reports for you. It has to know what your regulations are and how it can use the data, all the systems it's connected to pull that for you and take the burden, the manual burden, off of your personnel that should be really looking at security issues, right? And that's what you want. You want to be able to automate everything and see what your posture is. You need really nice dashboards, right? Dashboards is another catchphrase out there. Everybody's got an awesome dashboard. Show me your dashboard. Show me your dashboard. Well, who does that really benefit? It benefits those with that 10,000-foot level view, right? That are looking down and they just want to get an idea. Okay, where am I looking at for violation statistics? How am I doing? How many people don't have training right now that have access? Where am I sitting with that? How are my mitigation plans going with WEC and with SPPRE and with Texas RE? How is that going? How is that proceeding? Dashboards are nice for that executive level management view. But what you have to look for within that dashboard is, can you drill down on that? Can you take that dashboard view and get very specific and see in a granular fashion, but still usable by the end user, how was that dashboard generated, right? Because that's the useful information that will help the security operations center at your facility if you have one, right? The actual security personnel. It will help the compliance personnel be able to understand where their gaps are and where they need to improve processes and workflow. It'll allow you to do real-time change of your workflow, right? That's what you need to look for, being able to do that real-time change and move faster than the standard can, because we know that the standards don't move fast. Any regulatory standard does not move at the speed of light. It's very, very slow to change. So don't think about compliance, think about protecting your assets. Your most critical mission critical resources are protected through having a good security posture, and compliance comes out of that, right? So what should you look for within your compliance solution tool bag, right? You want some sort of common control and risk repository. So what does that mean? That means you want to have a solution that already knows what you have to do, all the things that you have to do and what types of evidence will be sufficient for an audit, what types of things will alert you for risks from a security standpoint. It has to know that already, right? And then on top of that, it has to be able to accept whatever user-defined systems you want to use, whatever you want to add to the repository for internal controls. Jim Brenton mentioned earlier a SAS 70 audit for internal controls. If you've established your own, put those in there, right? It has to be able to do that. Now, on top of that goes a great rules engine. You need to be able to see a rules engine that will automate your controls. That goes to that active policy enforcement, right? You want to be able to know what the threshold is, and once the threshold is violated, it takes a course of action on its own, right? Obviously, that course of action can be halted by the end user, but you want it to start the process and get you to a safe condition from a compliance and a security perspective. There also should be a repository for your documentation and your evidence, not just the evidence being generated by all of your systems out there, but your evidence, the policies you've created, the policies that you've implemented that have developed the common controls and risk library that you've added to, right? That risk repository that you've built for yourself. It should house that documentation that's the basis for that, right? Again, like I started off with, robust integration with what you already have. Why should you have to go out and replace everything that you've already spent so much money on and are maintaining with your license fees every year? Why should you have to replace that? Can you replace it? Absolutely, if you want to. Should you have to? No. Every solution should be able to tie in with everything that you already have and make it better, make it more compliant, make it better today, right? We talked about the physical security integration that's going along with the last bullet. Integrated with your security automation tools, talking about video surveillance specifically. Role-based dashboards, this is very good, again, for that executive level management view. So they can say, okay, I am a vice president level. I want to just see what's going on with physical security, and it pops up just information that would be relevant to that level. Again, moving towards that role-based access control model. The system knows who's looking at it. It's presenting to them the most valuable information right away and allowing them to drill deeper as they deem necessary, right? And that's very good for compliance folks, right? Compliance folks don't need to understand what's exactly going on with the details of implementing access down to the individual system level. Just in general, how does a compliance picture look for that system, for granting access? How is that workflow proceeding, right? Risk scoring, that's very valuable as well, right? So that you know, based on the controls that you've deployed, the risk library that you've created and the repository that exists, where are you sitting, right? How much risk do you have in your system right now? And that'll help you with ROIs, right? Return on investments for implementing new solutions. Do you need to reevaluate workflows? Do you need to add a new tool that can connect with this solution? What do you need to do? Risk scoring helps you with that, right? Asset discovery, visualization, and criticality rating. So one thing that a solution should do, it should be able to reach out and see what's on the network. It should be able to tell you what's there, not in an active manner, but in a very passive manner, just watching flows. It should be able to let you know what you have out there, what are possible risks, what are new risks that you didn't know about, right? That's what a solution should be able to do for you for NERC CIP. Situational awareness, we talked in depth about this, right? Situational awareness, you need to know what's going on in your systems, how you can protect yourselves, how you need to move your controls in the right direction. Right? Incident management, you want to be able to do that in an automated fashion. You want to be able to do that 24 hours a day, right? You don't have a full staff on board all the time, so the system should be able to initiate actions for you, initiate call trees, initiate certain steps to place you in that safe, secure, compliant position. Right? You need to be able to automate your access reviews. Your user access should be very automated, the reporting that comes out of that. You need to know where an individual has been through their entire life cycle of being with your company. What systems have they touched, right? At any time, what facilities are they allowed to have access to? Where have they been allowed to have access to? What IT systems do they have access to, et cetera? You need to be able to see that. You need to be able to review it. You need to be able to approve it. And there needs to be documentation supported within the system that does that. All right. And you need to be able to address your own assessments, right? Obviously, you have NERC CIP, but you're going to have internal controls. You're going to come up with your own methods for determining whether you're complying with your own policies. And a solution should be able to support that. It should be able to allow you to define assessments based on the regulations and your own internal controls and run those at the same time and keep you constantly aware of what risks exist. All right. So with that, tried to recover a little time there. I know next we have Steve Applegate, but are there any questions about access control, what solutions should look like? Anything from the audience? Mike.
Explain, was your, I don't want to say your product, but do products, do they integrate, you know, how do you integrate with the IEDs, like in the like the things that don't have an operating system and, you know, the embedded devices, that sort of thing? I mean, do you do that kind of thing?
Okay, so the question is, you know, intelligent electronic devices kind of at the endpoint in systems specifically, right, Mike? So we're talking about kind of generation plants, PLCs, things of that nature. So if we're talking specifically about the Alert Enterprise solution, how does it connect to a PLC? Well, it can. It doesn't necessarily. The idea is to control access at that point, right? So whatever's governing access to PLCs, the Alert Enterprise solution builds a connector for, right?
Talk to, like, you know, if there were, it says like a Rockwell application, you would connect to the application and control access to that, which would.
Right. The idea is to front end the access, right?
Is that kosher with, as far as NERC, like CIP 7 or R5? Is that, like, how do they view that? Because I know they want us to, don't they want us provision to the specific, I mean, how do they look at that application brokering the access? Is that okay? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think I see what you're saying. So is it okay to front end access? You know, when you're not putting it on the device itself, you know, is it okay to do it in another device? And yes, there's already been instances where you're front ending stuff. You know, one of the most common applications that I can think of, as I mentioned them earlier, Industrial Defender, right? Industrial Defender makes certain gateways that you can place in front of dial-up devices, right? The actual access authentication is occurring at the Industrial Defender gateway device, not at the dial-up asset. And you're front-ending it, you allow them access in. If they can't get past that, they cannot get to the dial-up asset, right? So there's already been instances where that has occurred, and that's proven successful in audits. So it is acceptable to do that. So the Alert Enterprise solution is meant to do that. Is meant to front end as much as possible. So when there's instances where there is not a front end device already existing, and I'll use Active Directory as the example, right? Very common system for access into your domain, right? You use an Active Directory domain controller. So you have that in place. We would tie into an Active Directory controller, have all that information that was already in the AD system, have that within the Alert Enterprise solution. When you choose to onboard someone and you choose that they need access into the EMS environment, it will recognize the AD system, allow you to provision, tie in with your HR system, your background checks, your training systems, pull all the certification data in, then pull in a workflow from that person's manager, the individual themselves if they're requesting additional access, or their manager if they're requesting for a new hire, right? Pull that workflow in and then tie it together with the system. And when the workflow says, yes, that person's approved for access, they have the certification, they have the training, their manager says they have a need to know, it will go out to that AD system and provision the access for them. It does it automatically. Now, why is that beneficial? Well, it's beneficial because if you have very dispersed systems, maybe you have 60 different systems that require individual ways to log in and authorize access. So you have multiple facilities running different versions of Secure or ProWatch, and that happens all the time. We know that. Places don't upgrade. You have all kinds of different versions. You're using Active Directory on your corporate network, but you're using application for OSIsoft maybe, right? You're there using that to authenticate you in, right? What we'll do is we'll tie into that and front end all of it. So the person that wants to start the workflow just goes to one spot, initiates the access, and then boom, it provisions it to 60 different systems or whatever the level of access is for that individual, right? And the alert solution wants to move you towards the RBAC framework, that role-based access control, but you don't have to. It just starts categorizing and moving you towards that direction. So eventually when you want to move your framework in that way and you're able to do it, you can already have a mature solution in place that has you halfway there. So,
well, what about, you know, we were talking, and I was talking about this, I think you were talking about when, you know, people change, like how would you know that, how would you design the role-based access control so that, like, you know, if I change cost centers, that it knows to go and remove my access? Well, I mean, is that?
So a change in roles or responsibilities is the question. How do you handle that? So as an individual moves or changes responsibilities, it really depends on the change itself. If we're talking about additional accesses, right, or access privileges, you're actually adding to their current role. So they're almost getting their their own role that's being developed because they wear many different hats, which is what we talked about earlier. You need that flexibility to do that. So when it's new access like that, you're actually submitting a new request for additional access on that existing personnel. I don't know if that necessarily answers the.
If I'm in working a control center, and then all of a sudden now I'm going to go work in marketing,
Okay.
you know.
Yeah, no, I do
I'm
know what you're
thinking
saying.
going back to
So yeah, let me get some specifics there. So if you were to go to we'll use a role as an EMS operator, right? If that is your role and you're going to be an EMS operator, you will have certain privileges assigned to that role, right? It doesn't lock you into that set of privileges, but it kind of gives you an easy way to provision access. So you know that this person's going to be an EMS operator, you assign them that role. If they need a few more access privileges, you'll assign that. Now, they move into marketing. They're going to have some of the same privileges, but not a lot, right? So what you'll do is you'll go in and assign a new role to them and revoke their past role. And then you can ensure that any additional accessees are still there. It all depends on the workflow that you want to set up. So you can create those roles, you don't have to, but that's how we would do it. You would base it off of key job functions, but then allow the flexibility to add additional accesses after that. If you terminate access, right, revocation is meant to be easy. So if you terminate access, you're hitting revoke, it's everything on that person, right? Because there's two ways you can look at it, at the individual basis or the role base. You can do role mining or just individual mining, right? So if you're looking at that individual and you hit revoke, they no longer need access anywhere. It's taking it all away. It's going into all of the systems and taking care of it. Now that can vary. The system connections can vary, right? You can have jobs scheduled, and typically the jobs are scheduled every 12 to 18 hours to ensure that you meet your 24-hour requirement in some cases, but it all depends on the system connection. Obviously our primary focus is to get a direct connection, real-time feed, so you're immediately revoking access to all systems, but that's kind of how you'd handle that. Does that answer that question, Mike? Or okay. Steve, did you have a question?
Maybe a kind of a weird question, but do you envision having something like this put in would require a reorg in an organization? Because I'm thinking in terms of, the traditional, well thought out layout of an organization is going to have IT security, and then they're going to have IT kind of as separate entities where they can, the IT security person doesn't report to the same boss, possibly all the way up to VP level or whatever that the IT would, so that there's no conflict of interest. I'm trying to figure out who you could hand this kind of power to and still have the checks and balances in place and stuff.
Okay, I think, the first part of the question, does it require any type of reorganization? No. The idea is that we can come in and be flexible for any organization. The idea is that we build business process flows as a team and make sure that that works for your organizational structure, and then we implement the solution in that manner. We don't want to, one thing that's common among a lot of security vendors is they get you tied down to certain streams of flow, right? Certain ways of metricizing your data. And we don't want to do that. We want the flexibility to be with the end user, right? The end user should be able to define what they need and what they have to have. So part of the key process of implementing the solution is to develop those organizational flowcharts, defining some roles and responsibilities in at least a minimal fashion, and then getting that workflow process documented. Does that answer that question, Steve? Did I miss any part of that? Okay.
If you gave somebody the full keys, they had all the way from the incident management and the vulnerability assessment keys and all the access control, do you think then you would have, is there a logging piece
There is.
that they can't affect the logs or affect the trail, or is that?
No, there is, and actually what you start to see is, it's obviously a modular solution, so it depends on the maturity level of the modules that you're taking in. But that is one of the modules, is to monitor for that escalation of privilege, the risk associated with using different access privileges. And one of the key controls that we put in place is the idea of a key checkout. That's not a new concept in security, but essentially that user privileges, because they're provisioned by the system itself, by the Alert Enterprise solution as the example, because access is provisioned that way, what you can do is super user access can be heavily restricted. You can have super user access provisioned by the alert system as needed for the user, right? And they would have to be required to check out a super user account that gets approved by their manager, and then the key is issued to them for a certain amount of time, and then that user account is expired by the system. So there's many different ways you can do it. That's just one example, but can do. Yeah, and one of the cool things is it provides a GUI interface for viewing the logs, and it's also dumping it to text file for you if you need to do it in raw format, or maybe you want your security guys want to set up their own parsing off of that so they can get that. That's all accessible by the end user. So. Any other questions? I think I recovered a little bit of time. So, all right, I will let Steve Applegate take over then.